Officer James Mitchell had served the royal family for 12 years. His uniform was always spotless, his boots polished to perfection, and his loyalty never questioned. At 35, he was one of the youngest officers ever, promoted to the elite Royal Protection Unit. The morning sun filtered through the grand windows of Kensington Palace as James took his position. Outside the private quarters today felt different somehow. The air was thick with tension that had been building for weeks. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, had become increasingly withdrawn. Her bright smile that once lit up every room had faded to worried glances and nervous fidgeting. James had noticed how she would flinch whenever certain adults approached her. The little princess had always been James's favorite assignment. Unlike her brothers, Charlotte possessed an old soul that reminded him of his own daughter back home. She would often wave at him during their brief encounters in the palace corridors. Her innocent questions about his job and her genuine interest in the palace guards had endeared her to everyone on the security team. But something was terribly wrong. James could feel it in his bones. The child who once skipped through the palace halls now walked with hesitant steps. Her governess reported that Charlotte had stopped participating in her favorite activities. The writing lessons she once begged for were now met with tears and excuses. Even her beloved art classes couldn't capture her attention anymore. Queen Camilla had been spending an unusual amount of time with Charlotte lately. While this might seem normal to outsiders, James had observed enough royal dynamics to know when something was amiss. The Queen's interactions with the young princess seemed forced, almost predatory. There was a coldness in Camilla's eyes whenever she looked at Charlotte that made James's protective instincts flare up. The palace staff whispered in hushed tones about Charlotte's behavior changes. The kitchen staff mentioned that she barely touched her meals. The housekeeping team noticed that her room remained unusually tidy, as if she was afraid to disturb anything. Most concerning of all, the night security reported hearing soft crying coming from Charlotte's room well past midnight. James had tried to discuss his concerns with his supervisor, Captain Reynolds, but was quickly dismissed. "Focus on your duties, Mitchell," Reynolds had said curtly. "Royal family dynamics are not our concern unless there's an immediate threat." But James couldn't shake the feeling that there was an immediate threat, just not the kind they were trained to handle. The breaking point came during a routine afternoon when James was stationed outside the Queen's private study. He could hear voices through the heavy oak door, and one of them belonged to Princess Charlotte. The child's voice was trembling, pleading almost. James pressed closer to the door, knowing he was violating protocol but unable to ignore his instincts. "Please, I don't want to," Charlotte's small voice carried through the door. "You will do as I say," came Camilla's sharp response. "This is what royal children must learn." "Stop being so dramatic." James felt his heart racing. Every fiber of his being told him that something was seriously wrong. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what happened when the threat came from within the family itself? The sound of Charlotte's muffled sobs made his decision for him. He knocked firmly on the door. "Your Majesty, you have a phone call from the Prime Minister's office," he announced, knowing full well there was no such call. "Not now." Camilla's voice was irritated. "They insisted it was urgent regarding tomorrow's state dinner," James pressed, his mind racing to create a believable interruption. After a moment of silence, the door opened. Camilla emerged with a forced smile, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "Watch the princess," she commanded James. "Make sure she doesn't leave this room until I return." As Camilla swept down the corridor, James looked into the study. Princess Charlotte sat in an oversized chair, her small frame dwarfed by the formal furniture. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a small stuffed animal that James recognized as her comfort toy from when she was younger. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" James asked gently, stepping into the room despite Camilla's orders to keep Charlotte inside. The little princess looked up at him with eyes full of fear and confusion. "She says I have to do things," Charlotte whispered. "Things that make me feel scared and sad. But she says it's normal for royal children." James felt a chill run down his spine. In his years of service, he had learned to read between the lines, to understand what wasn't being said. Charlotte's words, combined with her behavior changes and the fear in her eyes, painted a picture that made him physically ill. "Your Highness," James said carefully, kneeling down to Charlotte's eye level, "you never have to do anything that makes you feel scared or uncomfortable. That's not what being royal means." Charlotte's eyes widened with hope for the first time in weeks. Really? But she said Papa and Mama don't need to know because they wouldn't understand royal training. Those words confirmed James's worst fears. Someone was manipulating this innocent child, using her royal status and natural desire to please as weapons against her. The phrase royal training was clearly being used to normalize inappropriate behavior. James made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his secure communication device and sent an encrypted message to Prince William's personal protection officer. The message was simple but urgent. Immediate concern regarding Princess Charlotte's welfare. Request private meeting with Prince William ASAP. As footsteps echoed in the corridor signaling Camilla's return, James stood up quickly. But he had already set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped. Looking down at Charlotte's hopeful face, he made a silent promise that he would protect her, even if it cost him his career. The princess deserved better than to be a victim in her own home. And James Mitchell was determined to make sure she got it. The response to James's encrypted message came faster than expected. Within 2 hours, he received instructions to meet Prince William in the private chapel at midnight. The location choice wasn't random. The chapel was one of the few places in the palace where conversations couldn't be overheard or recorded. James spent the rest of his shift in a state of nervous energy. Every time he saw Queen Camilla, his stomach tightened with disgust. She carried herself with the same regal bearing as always, but now James could see the calculated coldness beneath her public facade. When she passed him in the corridor around dinner time, she gave him a sharp look that suggested she suspected something. "Officer Mitchell," she said, stopping directly in front of him. "I trust you understand the importance of discretion in royal matters." "Of course, Your Majesty," James replied, keeping his voice steady despite the warning bells going off in his head. "Good. Some family situations require delicate handling. I'm sure you recognize that children sometimes exaggerate or misunderstand adult guidance." Her smile was perfectly practiced, but her eyes held a clear threat. James nodded respectfully, but inside he was burning with anger. Camilla was already trying to discredit anything Charlotte might have said. This confirmed his suspicions that something deeply wrong was happening. As the palace settled into its evening routine, James made his way through the dimly lit corridors toward the chapel. His footsteps echoed softly on the marble floors as he passed centuries of royal portraits watching from their frames. The weight of history felt heavy on his shoulders. He was about to potentially accuse a member of the royal family of wrongdoing. Prince William was already waiting in the chapel when James arrived. The heir to the throne looked exhausted, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of deep concern. In the soft candlelight, William appeared more like a worried father than a future king. "Officer Mitchell," William said quietly, gesturing for James to sit in the pew beside him. "Your message was concerning. Tell me everything." James took a deep breath and began recounting his observations over the past several weeks. He described Charlotte's behavioral changes, the mysterious royal training sessions with Camilla, and most importantly, what he had witnessed that afternoon. William's face grew increasingly grave with each detail. "She said it was normal for royal children?" William asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Yes, sir." Princess Charlotte seemed genuinely confused about whether this was appropriate. "She mentioned that Queen Camilla told her you and the Princess of Wales wouldn't understand." William's jaw clenched. "My daughter has never undergone any royal training that Catherine and I weren't fully informed about. Every aspect of her education and preparation is carefully planned and supervised by us." James felt a wave of relief. His instincts had been correct. "Sir, I believe Princess Charlotte is being manipulated." The fear in her eyes. "I've seen it before in my previous work with vulnerable children." Before joining the Royal Protection Unit, James had spent 3 years working with a children's charity that dealt with abuse cases. He recognized the signs all too well: the withdrawal, the fear of certain adults, the confusion about what was normal behavior. William stood and began pacing the small chapel space. "Camilla has been insisting on private time with Charlotte, claiming it was important for her role as queen to bond with her step-granddaughter. Catherine and I thought it was actually quite thoughtful. Your Highness, I don't believe Princess Charlotte's distress is normal childhood adjustment. Something specific is happening during those private sessions." William stopped pacing and looked directly at James. "What are you suggesting we do? I can't exactly accuse the Queen based on one overheard conversation and behavioral observations." James had been thinking about this all evening. "Sir?" What if we created a situation where you could observe one of these sessions yourself? Or perhaps Princess Charlotte could be equipped with a small recording device. Absolutely not, William said firmly. I won't turn my 8-year-old daughter into a spy in her own home. There has to be another way. They sat in silence for several minutes, both men struggling with the delicate nature of the situation. Finally, William spoke again. Tomorrow evening, Camilla has requested another private session with Charlotte. She wants to prepare her for an upcoming public appearance. Catherine and I will be at a state dinner, which is why Camilla offered to help. James felt his protective instincts flare. Sir, with respect, perhaps Princess Charlotte could suddenly fall ill tomorrow? It would postpone any private sessions and give us time to investigate further. William shook his head. That would only delay the problem. No, I think we need to be more direct. I'm going to tell Catherine everything tonight. Together, we'll confront Camilla before any more harm can be done to Charlotte. Your Highness, James said carefully, if I may suggest, Queen Camilla has already begun discrediting Princess Charlotte's potential statements. She approached me earlier with warnings about children exaggerating. If you confront her directly, she might claim Charlotte is having behavioral problems or making up stories. William's expression darkened. Are you saying my own stepmother would gaslight an 8-year-old child? Sir, I'm saying someone who would manipulate a child is capable of anything to protect themselves. The reality of the situation settled over both men like a heavy blanket. They were dealing with someone who had access to Princess Charlotte, authority over her, and the power to make any accusation seem like family drama or childhood imagination. William pulled out his phone and typed a message. I'm asking Catherine to come home from her evening engagement. We need to hear directly from Charlotte about what's been happening. Your Highness, might I suggest approaching Princess Charlotte carefully? If she's been told this is normal or secret, she might be reluctant to speak freely. William nodded grimly. You're right. This requires delicate handling. He paused, looking at James with newfound respect. Officer Mitchell, I want you to know that your vigilance today may have prevented something terrible from continuing. Whatever the outcome, I won't forget your courage in speaking up. As they left the chapel together, James felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring answers, but it would also bring danger. If Camilla realized she was being investigated, there was no telling how she might react. The palace felt different as James walked back to his quarters. The familiar corridors seemed to hide shadows and secrets. Somewhere in these walls, a little girl was struggling with trauma she didn't understand, and tomorrow they would finally take action to protect her. The next morning arrived with an unusual tension hanging over Kensington Palace. James had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns about what the day might bring. As he took his morning position, he noticed increased security presence throughout the palace, a subtle sign that Prince William had taken his warnings seriously. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had returned home late the previous night. James could see the strain on her face as she moved through the palace corridors. Her usual warm demeanor was replaced with the focused determination of a mother protecting her child. When their eyes met briefly in the hallway, he saw a mixture of gratitude and barely contained anger. Princess Charlotte seemed different that morning, too. Instead of her recent withdrawn behavior, she appeared almost hopeful. James suspected that her parents had finally spoken with her the night before. The little girl walked with slightly more confidence, though she still glanced nervously around corners as if expecting Camilla to appear at any moment. Around mid-morning, James received an encrypted message on his secure device. Prince William wanted to see him in the private library at 11 o'clock. As James made his way through the palace, he noticed that several other security personnel were being repositioned. Something was definitely happening. The private library was a small, intimate space lined with first-edition books and family photographs. Prince William was there with Catherine, both looking like they hadn't slept much. Catherine's eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she had been crying. Officer Mitchell, Catherine began, her voice tight with emotion. We spoke with Charlotte last night. What she told us. She paused, unable to finish the sentence. William placed a protective hand on his wife's shoulder before continuing. Camilla has been conducting what she called special royal lessons with Charlotte. These sessions involved inappropriate physical contact disguised as teaching her how to properly greet important adults. She told Charlotte that this was how all royal women learned to handle uncomfortable situations with powerful men. James felt sick to his stomach. The manipulation was even worse than he had suspected. Camilla had been using Charlotte's royal status and natural obedience to normalize abuse. Charlotte believed this was normal, because Camilla convinced her it was part of royal tradition. Catherine added, tears flowing freely now. Our daughter has been enduring this for weeks because she thought she was being a good royal princess. What are your plans, your highnesses? James asked, his professional training helping him stay focused despite his anger. William's expression was cold and determined. We're going to end this today. Camilla has requested her usual afternoon session with Charlotte. Instead of sending Charlotte, we're going to confront her directly. Sir, she's already begun preparing defenses. Yesterday she warned me about children exaggerating and misunderstanding adult guidance. Catherine stood up abruptly, her royal composure cracking. Let her try to gaslight us. We have our daughter's detailed account, and Charlotte is willing to repeat everything to investigators if necessary. James admired Catherine's fierce protectiveness, but he was also concerned about the potential fallout. Your Highnesses, have you considered how Queen Camilla might react when cornered? Someone who could manipulate a child might be capable of more desperate measures. William nodded grimly. That's why we're taking precautions. Selected security personnel have been briefed and positioned throughout the palace. Additionally, we've contacted Child Protection Services and the police. Representatives will be here this afternoon. We want you present during the confrontation, Catherine added. You were the one who recognized the signs and had the courage to speak up. Charlotte specifically asked for the kind guard who talked to her nicely to be there. James felt honored by the princess's trust, but also deeply concerned about exposing her to any more trauma. Your Highnesses, will Princess Charlotte need to be present for this confrontation? Initially, no, William replied. We want to give Camilla the opportunity to confess and explain herself. If she denies everything or tries to manipulate the situation, then we may need Charlotte to provide her account directly. Catherine wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, transforming back into the composed royal figure the public knew. Officer Mitchell, there's something else. We've discovered that Camilla has been requesting private time with other young girls who visit the palace. Children of diplomats, family friends, staff members' daughters. The implications hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident with Charlotte. It was potentially a pattern of predatory behavior that had been happening under everyone's noses. How many other children might be involved? James asked. We're not sure yet, William admitted. But we've started reaching out to families whose children have spent time alone with Camilla. Some parents have mentioned behavioral changes similar to what we observed in Charlotte. The scope of the situation was becoming clearer, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. James realized that his decision to speak up might have prevented not just continued abuse of Princess Charlotte, but potential future victims as well. The confrontation is scheduled for 2 o'clock, Catherine informed him. Camilla believes she's coming for her regular session with Charlotte. Instead, she'll find us waiting with questions that need immediate answers. James checked his watch. It was nearly noon. They had 2 hours to finalize their preparations and ensure Princess Charlotte was safely away from the palace during the confrontation. Where will Princess Charlotte be during this meeting? James asked. With her brothers at their grandparents' house, William replied. They think it's just a fun afternoon visit. Charlotte knows what's happening, but she's been told she's safe now and doesn't need to worry about the outcome. As the meeting concluded, James felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. In just a few hours, they would finally confront Queen Camilla about her abuse of Princess Charlotte. The truth would come out, but James knew that the next few hours would be some of the most challenging in his career. Walking back to his post, James passed the room where Camilla usually held her sessions with Charlotte. The door was closed, but he could imagine the fear and confusion that little girl must have felt in that space. Today, they would make sure she never had to experience that fear again. The clock tower chimed noon, marking the beginning of what would be one of the most dramatic afternoons in recent royal history. At exactly 2 o'clock, Queen Camilla arrived at the private study where she expected to find Princess Charlotte waiting for their afternoon session. Instead, she found Prince William, Catherine, and 2 plainclothes police officers sitting around the mahogany table. James stood near the door, his presence both protective and official. Camilla's confident stride faltered for just a moment when she saw the unexpected gathering. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, taking in the serious expressions and formal atmosphere. Years of royal training helped her recover her composure, but James caught the flash of panic that crossed her features. "William, Catherine, what's the meaning of this?" Camilla asked, her voice carrying its usual authoritative tone. "Where is Charlotte? We have important preparations to discuss for next week's engagement." "Sit down, Camilla," William said firmly, his voice colder than James had ever heard it. "We need to talk about these preparations you've been conducting with my daughter." Camilla remained standing, her posture defensive. "I don't appreciate your tone, William. I am the queen, and I've been graciously helping Charlotte understand her royal duties. If you have concerns about my methods, we can discuss them privately." Catherine leaned forward, her maternal fury barely contained. "Your methods? Is that what you call traumatizing an 8-year-old child?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Camilla replied smoothly. But James noticed her hands beginning to tremble slightly. Children sometimes misinterpret adult guidance, especially when they're as sensitive as Charlotte. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, one of the plainclothes officers, spoke for the first time. "Your Majesty, we're here to investigate allegations of inappropriate conduct toward Princess Charlotte. We'd like to give you the opportunity to explain your interactions with the child." Camilla's mask of composure began to crack. "This is ridiculous. I am being accused by a confused child who doesn't understand royal protocols. William, surely you can see how inappropriate this is." "What's inappropriate?" William said, standing to face his stepmother, "is telling my daughter that uncomfortable physical contact is part of royal training. What's inappropriate is making her believe that her parents wouldn't understand these special lessons." "Charlotte has been having behavioral problems," Camilla countered quickly. "She's been attention-seeking and making up stories. I was trying to help her adjust to royal expectations." James watched as Camilla employed exactly the defense tactics he had predicted. She was attempting to gaslight everyone in the room by portraying Charlotte as an unreliable narrator. Detective Inspector Collins consulted her notebook. "Your Majesty, can you explain why you insisted these sessions with Princess Charlotte be private? Why were her parents not informed about the specific nature of these royal training activities?" "Because," Camilla said with forced patience, "some royal lessons are better taught woman to woman. Charlotte needed to understand how to handle certain situations she might face as she grows older." Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "What kind of situations require an 8-year-old to be touched inappropriately? What possible royal duty involves the kind of contact Charlotte described to us? You're taking a child's confused account and twisting it into something sinister," Camilla shot back. "Charlotte is imaginative and dramatic. She's probably seen something on television and incorporated it into her stories about our lessons." William pulled out his phone and pressed play on a voice recording. Charlotte's small, clear voice filled the room. "She made me practice greeting important men by letting them touch me in ways that felt wrong. She said royal ladies have to be polite even when they don't like what's happening. She showed me how to stand still and smile even when someone makes me uncomfortable." Camilla's face went pale as her own voice could be heard in the background of the recording, coaching Charlotte through what she called proper royal submission protocols. "That recording is taken out of context," Camilla stammered. But her previous confidence was completely gone. Detective Inspector Collins leaned forward. "Your Majesty, we also have reports from 3 other families whose young daughters spent private time with you during palace visits. All describe similar behavioral changes in their children following these interactions." James watched as the full weight of the situation settled over Camilla. She was no longer dealing with one confused child's word against hers. There was evidence, multiple victims, and professional investigators involved. Camilla began, then stopped. For the first time, she seemed to realize how serious her situation had become. "I was trying to prepare these children for the realities of royal and diplomatic life. Sometimes adults in positions of power behave inappropriately, and I thought it was important for them to understand how to handle such situations." "By recreating those inappropriate situations yourself?" Catherine asked incredulously. "By normalizing abuse instead of teaching children to report it and seek help?" William moved closer to Camilla, his voice dangerously quiet. "You convinced my daughter that being victimized was part of her royal duty. You made her believe that her discomfort and fear were normal and expected." Detective Inspector Collins stood and opened her briefcase. "Your Majesty, I'm placing you under arrest for child abuse and inappropriate conduct with minors." "You have the right to remain silent." "No!" Camilla interrupted, panic finally breaking through her royal facade. "You don't understand. I was protecting them. I was teaching them survival skills for the world they'll inhabit. Royal children face dangers that ordinary families can't imagine. By becoming one of those dangers yourself," James spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. His voice was steady but filled with disgust. "You betrayed the trust of children who looked up to you." Camilla turned to look at James with genuine hatred in her eyes. "This is your fault. You interfered in family matters that were none of your concern. You've destroyed everything." "No," James replied firmly. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided to harm Princess Charlotte. I just made sure you couldn't keep doing it." As the police officers formally arrested Queen Camilla, James felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Princess Charlotte and other children were now safe, but sadness that it had taken so long for someone to recognize and act on the signs of abuse. The investigation would continue, more victims might come forward, and the royal family would face intense scrutiny. But most importantly, Princess Charlotte would never again have to endure those terrifying royal lessons that had stolen her childhood innocence. Through the window, James could see reporters gathering outside the palace gates. Word was already spreading about the unprecedented arrest of a queen. The monarchy would survive this scandal, but it would be forever changed by the courage of one little girl who finally found adults willing to listen and believe her story. The arrest of Queen Camilla sent shockwaves through the palace and beyond. Within hours, the story had broken internationally, with news crews gathering outside every royal residence. James found himself at the center of a media storm he had never imagined when he first decided to speak up for Princess Charlotte. In the days following Camilla's arrest, the true scope of her actions became clear. Detective Inspector Collins contacted James regularly with updates on the expanding investigation. 7 families had now come forward with concerns about their children's interactions with the former queen. The pattern was always the same: private sessions disguised as royal etiquette lessons, followed by dramatic behavioral changes in the children. Princess Charlotte was receiving professional counseling to help her understand that what happened wasn't her fault. James was relieved to hear that she was beginning to show signs of her old personality returning. The little girl who had once skipped through palace corridors was slowly emerging from the shadow of trauma. 3 days after the arrest, Prince William requested another private meeting with James. This time, they met in William's personal office, a space that felt more like a family home than a royal workplace. Photos of Catherine and the children lined the desk, and Charlotte's artwork decorated a small bulletin board. "Officer Mitchell," William began, looking exhausted but determined, "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Without your intervention, Charlotte might have suffered for months or years longer." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your Highness, I was just doing my job. Protecting the royal family includes protecting them from all threats." "Yes, but you recognized a threat that others missed or chose to ignore. That takes more than training, it takes moral courage." William paused, studying James's face. "The investigation has revealed something else." Several palace staff members had noticed changes in Charlotte's behavior, but no one spoke up except you. This revelation troubled James deeply. How many adults had seen the signs but decided it wasn't their place to interfere? How many opportunities to help Charlotte had been missed because of hierarchy, protocol, or simple indifference? "Sir, may I ask how Princess Charlotte is coping with everything?" William's expression softened slightly. "She's remarkable, actually. Once she understood that what happened wasn't normal or acceptable, she became determined to help other children who might be in similar situations. She wants to make sure no other little girl has to go through what she experienced." The strength and resilience of the young princess impressed James tremendously. Even after being victimized, Charlotte's first thought was protecting others from the same fate. The counselors say her desire to help others is actually a healthy way of processing her trauma. William continued, "Catherine and I are incredibly proud of her courage, both in enduring this situation and in helping us understand what was happening." James nodded, thinking about his own daughter at home. The thought of anyone subjecting her to what Charlotte had endured made his protective instincts flare even now. "Your Highness, what will happen to Queen Camilla now?" William's jaw tightened. "She's been formally charged with multiple counts of child abuse and inappropriate conduct. Her legal team is trying to negotiate some kind of plea arrangement, but the evidence is overwhelming. The recorded conversations, multiple victim statements, and expert testimony about grooming behavior make her position untenable. And the monarchy? How will this affect the institution? That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you, William replied. This scandal has forced us to examine our internal safeguards and protocols. We're implementing new procedures to ensure something like this can never happen again. William handed James a thick folder. We're creating a new position, Director of Child Protection Services for the Royal Household. The person in this role will be responsible for monitoring all interactions between adult members of the royal family and children, implementing safety protocols, and serving as an advocate for young people within our institution. James opened the folder and began reading the detailed job description. It was comprehensive and clearly designed to prevent any future incidents of abuse or exploitation. We want you to consider accepting this position, William said. Your background in child protection, combined with your demonstrated moral courage and understanding of royal protocols, makes you uniquely qualified. The offer surprised James completely. Moving from security work to child advocacy would be a significant career change, but it would also allow him to make a real difference in protecting vulnerable children. Your Highness, this is unexpected. I'm honored by your confidence, but this seems like it should go to someone with more formal credentials in child psychology or social work. Those experts will be consultants and advisors, William explained. But we need someone who understands the unique challenges of royal life and isn't afraid to speak truth to power. You proved that when you stood up for Charlotte despite the potential consequences to your career. James thought about Princess Charlotte's courage in enduring and ultimately reporting her abuse. If an 8-year-old could show that kind of bravery, surely he could step up to help protect other children in similar situations. I would need time to consider this carefully, Your Highness. It's a significant responsibility. Of course, take all the time you need. But James, William leaned forward, using his first name for the first time. You've already shown that you're willing to put children's welfare above everything else. That's exactly the kind of person we need in this role. As the meeting concluded, James felt the weight of the opportunity before him. He had started this journey simply trying to protect one frightened little girl. Now he was being offered the chance to create systemic changes that could protect countless children in the future. Walking back through the palace corridors, James noticed that the atmosphere had changed. Staff members made eye contact more readily, as if the breaking of Camilla's authority had freed them to be more authentic. Several colleagues approached him throughout the day to express their gratitude for speaking up when they hadn't found the courage to do so themselves. That evening, James called his wife to discuss William's offer. The conversation lasted well into the night as they weighed the pros and cons of such a dramatic career change. Ultimately, his wife's response crystallized his thinking. If our daughter was in Charlotte's situation, I would want someone like you looking out for her. The next morning, James requested another meeting with Prince William to accept the position. As he walked toward the meeting, he passed the room where Camilla had conducted her royal training sessions. The door was sealed with crime scene tape, a stark reminder of the horrors that had taken place behind closed doors. Soon, that room would be converted into something positive, perhaps a playroom or library where children could feel safe and protected. James was determined to ensure that no child would ever again suffer in silence within the walls of any royal residence. 6 months after accepting his new role as Director of Child Protection Services for the royal household, James had transformed how the monarchy approached child safety. His office, located in a bright corner of Kensington Palace with windows overlooking the gardens, had become a sanctuary for any child who needed someone to listen. The changes he implemented were comprehensive and revolutionary for such a traditional institution. Every adult member of the royal family, extended family, and senior staff now underwent mandatory training on recognizing signs of abuse and appropriate boundaries with children. No child could be alone with any adult without at least 2 other people present, and all interactions were logged and reviewed regularly. Princess Charlotte had become an unexpected ally in James's work. Now 9 years old and fully recovered from her trauma, she had developed a remarkable ability to help other children feel comfortable sharing their experiences. With her parents' permission and professional supervision, Charlotte sometimes spoke with young visitors to the palace who seemed withdrawn or fearful. "Mr. James," Charlotte said during one of their regular check-in meetings. "There's a girl whose mama works in the kitchen. I think she's scared of something, but she won't talk to the grown-ups." James had learned to trust Charlotte's instincts completely. Her experience had given her an uncanny ability to recognize when other children were struggling. "What makes you think she's scared?" "She hides behind her mama when certain people come around. And she doesn't want to play with toys. She just sits very still like she's trying to be invisible." This was exactly the kind of observation that James's new protocols were designed to catch and address. Within hours, he had spoken with the child's mother and arranged for a gentle conversation with the little girl. It turned out she had been experiencing bullying at school that had made her fearful of most adult interactions. The case was resolved quickly with proper intervention, but it highlighted how James's new system was working. Children were being protected not just from obvious threats, but from any situation that might cause them distress or trauma. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's trial had concluded with her conviction on multiple charges. She received a 5-year prison sentence and was stripped of all royal titles and privileges. The judge's statement during sentencing had been particularly harsh, noting that Camilla had betrayed the trust of the most vulnerable members of society while holding a position of ultimate privilege and responsibility. King Charles had remained notably silent throughout the entire ordeal. Palace sources suggested he was devastated by his wife's actions and was undergoing his own counseling to process the betrayal. The monarchy's approval ratings had initially plummeted following the scandal, but gradually recovered as the public saw the concrete steps being taken to prevent future incidents. James's work had expanded beyond the royal family to include protocols for all children who visited royal residences, whether they were children of staff, diplomatic families, or participants in royal charity events. He had established partnerships with leading child protection organizations and had created a network of professionals who could respond immediately to any concerns. One afternoon, James received a call that would test all of his new systems. A 10-year-old boy visiting the palace with his ambassador parents had been found crying in a bathroom by palace security. When James arrived, the child was clearly distressed but unable to explain what was wrong. Using techniques he had learned from child trauma specialists, James created a calm environment and gently encouraged the boy to share what had happened. It emerged that one of the diplomatic security personnel had made inappropriate comments and had attempted to touch the child inappropriately during a tour of the palace grounds. James immediately activated the emergency protocols he had established. The diplomat was detained by palace security, while child protection services and police were contacted. The boy's parents were notified, and professional counselors were brought in to assess the child's needs. Within 2 hours, a comprehensive response was underway. Most importantly, James ensured that the young victim understood he had done nothing wrong, and that the adults around him would make sure he was safe. The boy's relief at being believed and protected was evident, and James was reminded once again why his work was so crucial. The incident also demonstrated how the new protocols could protect children from threats that originated outside the royal family itself. James's systems weren't just about preventing internal abuse, they were about creating an environment where any threat to a child's safety would be immediately identified and addressed. At Prince William and Catherine had become strong advocates for James's work, often speaking publicly about the importance of child protection in institutional settings. Their willingness to address the scandal transparently and implement meaningful reforms had helped restore public confidence in the monarchy. "James," Prince William said during one of their monthly meetings, "the impact of your work extends far beyond our family. Other institutions are adopting similar protocols based on what you've developed here." This was true. Schools, religious organizations, and other institutions that regularly worked with children had reached out to learn from the royal family's new approach to child protection. James had been invited to speak at conferences and had consulted with organizations around the world. But for James, the most meaningful measure of success was simpler. Children who came to royal events or visited the palace no longer showed signs of fear or distress. They played freely, interacted naturally with adults, and seemed genuinely happy to be there. Princess Charlotte had become a symbol of resilience and recovery, but she had also become something more important, a normal little girl who felt safe in her own home. She still waved at James when she saw him in the corridors, but now her smile was genuine and carefree rather than the careful, practiced expression she had worn during her trauma. "Thank you for keeping us safe," Charlotte had told James recently. "Not just from bad people, but from being scared all the time." Those words captured exactly what James had hoped to achieve. Safety wasn't just about preventing specific incidents of abuse. It was about creating an environment where children could simply be children, free from fear and anxiety about the adults around them. As James looked out his office window at Charlotte playing in the palace gardens with her brothers, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The little girl who had once flinched at approaching footsteps now ran freely across the lawn, secure in the knowledge that she was protected and valued. The system James had built would outlast his own career and would continue protecting children long into the future. But more than that, it had proven that institutional change was possible when people were willing to prioritize children's welfare above tradition, hierarchy, and convenience. 5 years had passed since James first heard Princess Charlotte's frightened voice through the study door. Now at 14, Charlotte had grown into a confident young woman who spoke passionately about child protection issues. She had become the public face of her family's commitment to safeguarding vulnerable children, delivering speeches at international conferences and meeting with child protection organizations worldwide. James stood in the back of the United Nations Assembly Hall in New York, watching Charlotte address world leaders about the importance of listening to children. Her composure and eloquence amazed everyone present, but James remembered the terrified 8-year-old who had once whispered about being forced to do things that scared her. "When adults have power over children," Charlotte was saying to the assembly, "they have a sacred responsibility to use that power to protect, not to harm. Every child deserves to feel safe, to be heard, and to know that trustworthy adults will believe them when they speak up about inappropriate behavior." The standing ovation that followed her speech lasted several minutes. James felt tears in his eyes as he watched this remarkable young woman, who had transformed her own trauma into a mission to protect others. The little girl he had helped save had grown up to become a voice for children everywhere. After the speech, Charlotte found James in the reception area. Despite her new status as a prominent advocate and future royal, she still greeted him with the same warm familiarity she had shown as a child. "Mr. James," she said, using the title she had never abandoned, "thank you for being here today. It means so much to have you witness this moment." "Your Highness," James replied with genuine pride. "Watching you speak today reminded me why we fought so hard to protect you all those years ago. You've become everything we hoped you could be." Charlotte's expression grew serious for a moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day?" James had thought about this often over the years. "I think you would have found your voice eventually. Your strength was always there. It just needed the right people to recognize and nurture it." "Maybe," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "But I know for certain that other children would have been hurt while I was still finding that voice. Your courage saved more than just me." This was true. In the 5 years since James had established the child protection protocols at the palace, similar systems had been implemented in government buildings, diplomatic residences, and cultural institutions around the world. The Kensington Protocols, as they had become known, were now considered the gold standard for protecting children in institutional settings. The former Queen Camilla had served her full sentence and had been released from prison 6 months earlier. She lived in exile, stripped of all titles and forbidden from any contact with members of the royal family. Occasionally, tabloid newspapers would publish stories about her attempts to rehabilitate her public image. But these efforts were universally unsuccessful. More importantly, the investigation that began with Charlotte's case had led to the prosecution of several other individuals in positions of power who had abused children. The courage shown by one little princess had started a chain reaction that had brought justice to many victims and prevented countless future incidents of abuse. James's own career had evolved far beyond his original role. He now served as an international consultant on child protection, working with governments and organizations worldwide to implement comprehensive safeguarding systems. His protocols were being used to protect children in schools, religious institutions, sports organizations, and anywhere else that children might be vulnerable to adult exploitation. But perhaps most remarkably, James's work had helped change the fundamental culture around child protection. The old attitude that children should be seen and not heard that they might exaggerate or misunderstand adult behavior, had been replaced with a presumption that children's concerns should be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. The evening after Charlotte's UN speech, James attended a private reception for child protection advocates from around the world. Many of the attendees were survivors of childhood abuse who had channeled their experiences into protecting others. The room was filled with people who understood that preventing child abuse required constant vigilance and institutional commitment. Charlotte moved through the reception with grace beyond her years, speaking with survivors, advocates, and policymakers about their shared mission. James watched as she listened intently to each person's story, offering support and encouragement to those who were still healing from their own experiences. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who had worked with Charlotte during her recovery. "When she first came to me, she was a traumatized little girl who blamed herself for what happened. Now look at her. She's become a leader in the movement to protect children worldwide." James nodded, remembering those early counseling sessions when Charlotte had struggled to understand that she wasn't responsible for Camilla's actions. The strength was always there. She just needed to understand that what happened to her wasn't normal or acceptable. "The work you've done since then has been equally impressive," Dr. Chen continued. "The protocols you developed have become a model for institutions everywhere. You've probably prevented more cases of child abuse than we'll ever know." As the reception was ending, Prince William and Catherine approached James. They had remained close friends and collaborators throughout the years, united by their shared commitment to protecting children and their gratitude for James's role in saving their daughter. "James," William said, "Catherine and I have been discussing the future of child protection work within the monarchy and beyond. We have a proposition for you." Catherine smiled warmly. "We want to establish a permanent foundation dedicated to child protection, with you as its director. The foundation would have the resources to implement protection protocols globally and to support survivors of childhood abuse." The offer was both humbling and exciting. James had always known that his work at the palace was just the beginning of what needed to be a lifelong commitment to protecting children. "Your Highnesses," James replied, "I would be honored to accept that role, but I want Charlotte to be involved in leading this foundation as well. Her voice and perspective are crucial to its success." Charlotte, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward with a bright smile. "Mr. James, I was hoping you would say that. I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with to protect other children." As James looked around the room filled with advocates, survivors, and supporters, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. It had started with one frightened little girl and one security guard who decided to listen to his instincts. Now it had grown into a global movement dedicated to ensuring that no child would have to suffer in silence. The work was far from over. There would always be people who sought to exploit their power over vulnerable children, and there would always be institutions that needed to be held accountable for protecting the young people in their care. But James was confident that the foundation they were building would continue this vital work for generations to come. Princess Charlotte, now a young woman but still the brave child who had trusted him with her truth, would carry this mission forward long after James was gone. And somewhere in the world, other children who might otherwise suffer in silence would find their voices and their protectors, creating an unbroken chain of courage and compassion that began with one guard's decision to speak up for what was right.